Good evening and welcome to the Glazov Gang. I'm not Jamie Glazov, I'm Josh Brewster, filling in for Jamie tonight. And today we have a great dream team, as Jamie likes to say, of guests. Before I get going here, I want to remind you that the Glazov Gang is, of course, brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and there's a fantastic new pamphlet come out called The Great Betrayal, Obama's Wars and the War in Iraq. If you remember The Party of Defeat, book by David Horowitz and Ben Johnson, talking about Democrats supporting the war and then turning and denying that they ever supported the war and trashing the war effort completely. How did that dovetail into the Obama administration? Where do we stand today? We're going to get into all these things: Libya, Syria, the onrush of the Muslim Brotherhood across the Middle East, and all that stuff. The Great Betrayal, Obama's Wars, and the War in Iraq by Daniel Greenfield. Introduction by David Horowitz. Tonight, my guests are Mr. Evan Sayet, America's #1 conservative comedian. We'll talk about who's number 2 and who's number 3 a little bit later.
And by the way, if you think about it, who better to have on a show when you plan to talk about how betrayal and the wars in Syria than America's #1 comedian?
Exactly. Exactly. In fact, next week we're going to have Shecky Green on to talk about Syria, so that should be a fantastic segment. And also tonight, Mr. Eric Allen Bell. Recently I interviewed Eric for over an hour on the radio about the mega mosque in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and all the issues surrounding it. We're going to get an update from Eric tonight about the goings on in Tennessee. Finally, and we're going to start here, this is Mr. Mike Walsh. Mike Walsh is the author of The People versus the Democratic Party. He is a former associate editor of Time magazine and a columnist for the New York Post, also a contributor to National Review and PJ Media. And this is published by Encounter Books. It's an Encounter broadside, and this little book packs a lot of punch. We're going to start with Mike here tonight. Mike, I got to tell you, first of all, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right. One of the great things about this book is the Scoop Jackson quote, which I'm going to read. It's very brief. Today, a Scoop Jackson Democrat, socially liberal but strong on defense, is as extinct as his namesake. And I'm going to start there. This is an interesting broadside about the Democratic Party. Why don't you tell me a little bit about this, and then we'll talk some particulars.
Right. Well, the broadside series is read by Roger Kimball of Encounter Books, and there's 30 of them. This is number 30. And they're meant to be about 5,000 or 6,000 words apiece, and you just lay into whoever your victim is. So Andy McCarthy has done something on Sharia law, and other writers have contributed. And Roger and I were talking about this book back in the winter, and he said, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "You know, I'd like to write about how the Democrats are a criminal organization masquerading as a political party." And that was actually the working title, and we couldn't quite get it to fit on the cover, but it's too bad. So we went to the more prosecutorial People versus Democrat Party. But as you look at the history of the party, you see that, you know, Scoop Jackson, the kids today won't even know who Scoop Jackson was. That is patriotic Democrats. They're now essentially the anti-American party, and that's what this book's about.
I've been saying for a long time, and I've said on this show, that I believe that even JFK at this point would be considered a Republican, even if he was telling people who was a Democrat.
Well, now just jump in for one quick second.
Yeah,
if you just take JFK's most iconic statement, ask not what your country can do for you, what is the Democrat Party about today? Demand that your country do. But take the flip side as well. Ask what you can do for your country, but you can't ask that because that would be xenophobic. They're citizens of the world. JFK, in every measure, would be reviled by Barack Obama and the Democrat Party today.
I'd like to add to that before I get back to Mike here. RFK was a staunch supporter of Israel, and obviously an anti-communist. And you know, you just don't get that flavor of Democrat anymore. But the zenith of the twin strains of anti-American leftist thought, according to this man, Mike, Barack Obama. He is the spawn of the gangster ethos of the 20s and 30s and the fashionable Marxism of the revolutionary year of 1968. He represents the twin strains of anti-American leftist thought. When I think of the various flavors of the left, Mike, I think it's very interesting that you point out that he does really speak to the whole South Side of Chicago / Tammany Hall / 1968 revolutionary ethos, and I think it's very interesting that you mentioned.
Well, people forget the Democrat Party has had a long and cozy relationship with organized crime and the criminal element in America. I start the book with Aaron Burr, who killed one of the founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, and I take you through the days of Tammany Hall, which was the Irish-controlled, big-city democratic machine that also was in bed with the gangsters of its day and set an example for all the other big-city machines, including Chicago, where the Capone mob eventually won the struggle for dominance. And what people don't remember is that Saul Alinsky, who is Obama's mentor and rabbi, Saul Alinsky came up in the Capone mob. He was very close friends with Frank Nitti, who took over the mob after Capone went to Alcatraz for tax evasion, and has publicly said in his writings that everything he learned about community organizing, he learned from Capone. So this is a party that is way too cozy with the criminal element.
Well, you point out that they're driven to take on more and more and more power, and there's a sort of an unashamed way of doing this in their history.
Well, all they care about is power. What they do is, as you guys know, they masquerade as kindly and tolerant and progressive, and we're only here to help. But what they really want to do is take on more and more power. And what they learned from their gangster cronies, going all the way back to the gangs of New York days in the 19th century, is that you could take over a city, then you can take over a state, when they took over Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Arkansas, Illinois, and now with Obama, they've realized you can take over the entire country, and you can run it along the lines of a gangland family. And you've got Rahm Emanuel now in Chicago as the mayor of Chicago. That was totally planned so that he would be there.
Entirely
to
set up.
supervise the theft of that election. And you've got their tentacles all over the place. They're a very dangerous group of people, and people ought to understand that. Plus, they're the anti-American party. I mentioned in the election of 1864, when Lincoln is trying to keep the country together during the Civil War, he runs against the general he fired, General McClellan, who's on a platform written by the Copperhead Democrats who were peace at any price. We've lost the war against the South. Let's give up. Let's split the country. The end. I mean, this is 1864. And then, of course, Lincoln was the victor in the Civil War, and he was assassinated by, let's see, oh yeah, a Democrat murdered Abraham Lincoln. So that's quite a history.
So, Mike, before we move on to the other guys here who might have a few things to say about this, one thing I wanted to talk about with regard to this book, and maybe this will be a touchstone for some further conversation, is you put it out toward the end, it's time to make them live up to their own moral code. Exactly. Why don't you give me a little bit of information on that, and we can talk about it.
Well, this is famous Alinsky rule number 4. And remember, again, Obama grew up with Alinskyite principles. And rule number 4 is to make the enemy live up to his own book of rules, because he won't be able to do it. And you'll break him that way. And I wrote a book under my pseudonym, David Kahane, 2 years ago, called Rules for Radical Conservatives, in which I espouse that the right needs to adopt the tactics of the left and go after them. And I mean go after them the same way they come after us, with brass knuckles and clubs.
Do you think there's too much civility amongst
I think our side is just terrible.
You know, the good always has that problem, whether it's the Israelis versus the terrorists.
You don't want to lower yourself to, but in this case, we got a real fight on our hands.
But you have to survive.
You have to survive. And I got a lot of letters from people who said, oh, well, we don't really want to lower ourselves. And I say, if you don't want to lower yourselves, learn how to fight like these guys do, you're not going to win.
You're not going to win. Eric, did you want to jump in?
I just think the American people are so disillusioned with the two-party system that, although I agree with most of what you're saying about the Democratic Party, I think a strong argument could be made very similar about the Republican Party.
That'd be a different broadside.
Being very sold out, being very much working against the interests of the common person, very compromised, very much in support of plutocracy, in the same way, really, that the Democrats are, with some slight differences. To me, I just think your average American is kind of tuned out to this partisan debate and more concerned with their self-interest at this time.
I think everything changed after World War II. People don't think about it, but the world was technologically, agriculturally, as medicinally, 5,000 years. I mean, the 5,000-year leap is the name of a book, but 5,000 years ahead of just a couple of decades ago. Everything that everybody from the dawn of time until the day before, let's say I was born, had to worry about disease. The day before I was born, they got rid of polio, smallpox, chickenpox, hunger. Now if you find 99 cents in the street, you can get a gourmet meal at the 99-cent store. Right? So suddenly, anybody born in our time and afterwards really had nothing to worry about.
You know what, Evan, I'm going to tell you what, let's touch on a little bit more of that in the next segment, but you're talking about something interesting. World War II generation, these were people who were here in America. America meant something to them. They were drafted, they gave their lives for this, and the ideals of America, its founding principles drove them. Now we're extremely critical. We've lived in a deconstructionist age. I want to talk more about this in our next segment, about the Democrats, how they're handling our founding principles now that they have all the power. We're also going to get into the Murfreesboro Mosque. We're going to talk to Evan, find out who the #2 conservative comedian is in our next segment. Thanks for watching the Glazov Gang. I'll talk to you.